uh, and how yes, sorry, and how the importance of the nonprofit or community-based organizations' connection with community and the community that they serve. Just a couple of examples that I was thinking of. So at least in the public health space, in Oregon, and I know this is true in many other states now, the shift into not just counting on state and or local public health agents, deliverer of public health messages. And you could say that throughout the pandemic, sort of the funds flow from the federal government through the state down to a local public health agency or group to get things done. What we've seen is that is the value of changing not all of the relationship, but changing part of the relationship through community-based organizations, especially those that have a much stronger trust than government does in communities. Those that communities that maybe have English as a second language, the value of partnering and getting work done through trusted community-based organization partners versus just, hey, we're the government, we're here to serve, I think is an effect of that transition. But I do think that the piece to grapple with is, I think, is how much the public trust the services, whether social services or health services, that are being provided by or through a state. And I think that the mistrust of government and all things associated with government that you've seen in the pandemic, I think really does add a complex of whether it's a good idea or a bad idea to move in that contract state.
Thanks, David. I appreciate your insights. Tom, public contracting was typically viewed for large infrastructure projects like toll roads or bridges initially. But over the last 20 years, we've seen a significant expansion of government contracting into the delivery of social and human services, primarily through nonprofit agencies. How critical are these contractual relationships to the achievement of our public policy objectives now and looking into the future?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, David, you think the relationship between government and public sector partners in the human and social sector, has been really essential over the last many years. Especially as how social services are funded has evolved at time. I think the success of publicly funded direct care costs really, depends on the stability of this relationship between government and social service or human service partners whose interests are aligned with one another, and where government, from the agility and the ability of these organizations to sort of exercise that expertise, where government is, I would say, in many cases, less competent at recruitment and so forth. Even though we certainly do our best as government administrators in this area, I don't know that we would be as successful if we didn't have the benefit of a very mature, well-developed network of social service organizations and human service organizations, whose interests are aligned with ours, where they are created, to as David mentioned, to deliver direct care services and to foster trust and respect, not only among beneficiaries, but also among the general public and the taxpayers. So, I'd say that, the experience of outsourcing work, whether you're talking about, public or private and non-governmental sector work, is just, a fact of our shared life right now for many years. I think with respect to, essential public services, we, at least in Massachusetts, have benefited from, a very strong network of non-governmental partners, in the area of community services, community development, youth services, with developmental services. It's just been a really symbiotic relationship, with the non-governmental sector. I think where the challenges are in, where your interests aren't necessarily, and how do you reconcile, those tensions and those problems, and where you have this codependency, between, what government is, authorized and statutorily mandated to do, and where the industry, is, and, where your interests may not be perfectly aligned. How do you reconcile, those differences? And so we've, at least, in our experience, we've set up structures where we can, come together and meet to talk about, some of those tensions, particularly around the pricing of and so forth. But when you're talking about contracting, it's both cost and quality, right? It's the standard we use is a best value standard. So it's both the price per unit or the price per service plus the quality, however you define that, sort of fundamental, basic standards of care, and staffing ratios and so forth, but it's also, some of the more aspirational outcomes that you want to see, in a lot of, what government, delivers.
Thanks, Tom. Building on that conversation and kind of looking at where the interests of a contracting agency versus a public agency might diverge. Dave, what do you see as the inherent risks, maybe the costs and benefits of engaging or outsourcing the delivery of social services? I know at CDC, and you probably were in the thick of it when you were here, there's a lot of conversation about just having contractors do things that are very close to being inherently government services and the challenges with that. So can you share some thoughts on that with us?
Yeah, no, thanks for the questions. I think just to hit on that last point, just even the term, sort of inherently governmental, and what does that mean? Like, what is the value of something that should be inherently governmental? What is that? Is it in the public's trust from a policymaking role? You, John Q. citizen, expect that it is Dave as a government employee that's making policy decisions based on rules and regulations? Is it John Q. Corporation that that is doing that equally, and really doing all of the work, and therefore influencing that decision so much so that it's really the corporation? What interests are they acting in? And cost benefit piece is hard to sort of place that exactly where it makes sense, because that the value that and I think Tom hit it well, that from being able to bring in staff more quickly, different levels of expertise private sector group could bring to any public agency doing anything is, I think, very valuable. I will say that in my transition 3 years ago from CDC, after being there for 18 years, to Oregon, the use of contractor is much less in policy operational roles as I saw at CDC. I was surprised. I was like, wait, where are the contractors to help do that work? And I think it's in some ways it's a money conversation of why this exists, of what that would be. I guess the one story, or sort of the and hopefully this isn't too far afield of, since my life was so much the pandemic, I'm going to at least go there for a bit. So one of the roles I had over the last 2 years, actually just over a year ago, to lead the state's COVID vaccine distribution effort. Don't ever say yes if someone ever asks you to do that again. So it was probably the most intense job I've ever had, because at least at that point, everybody wanted the vaccine and there wasn't enough to go around. And so I was where vaccine was sent every week, which made me a pretty important person in the state, but boy, did people hate that. And the point sort of to the question of cost and benefits to outsourcing delivery of services. So one thing that I will, that pretty well was the development of a new vaccine. I mean, the fact that we got from from initial entry of COVID to a vaccine in the time that we did is unbelievable from a public health immunization development. It is, and at the same time, the thought of how to get that vaccine into someone's arm was not well thought out, and there was a failure of a private sector minded push to say develop and ship. And don't get me wrong, that part was amazing. I mean, that we could say within 2 days to say we want vaccine shipped to 450 places in the state, and 2 days later it would show up. Well, the problem was that those 450 places weren't ready to store really cold vaccine, and defrost it, get it in the right shape to be able to do that. No other vaccine was like it. So that piece of sort of a private sector mentality of get it to market, well, they forgot that the market wasn't ready for it. And I think lots of those examples of where there were just the benefits of the government could not have done what I think the private sector did in the development of vaccine. We don't have the public doesn't have the infrastructure to do that. And the delivery of that service. And so like how to partner together when you get into these big things, I think is, I think there are both sides to that, because you probably wouldn't want a private sector partner deciding where vaccine should be sent on a weekly basis. Not want that as a tax. Well, maybe some taxpayers would want that. But anyway, hopefully that is a helpful.
Yeah, I think it is. I think the challenge you point out is that we benefited from the innovation that comes with the development of the vaccine, being able to produce it so quickly. But we didn't anticipate the level of epidemic that we're dealing with in COVID in both scope and length. I know CDC takes a lot of criticism for how that process has been handled, but the reality is that the agency was never set up to do an emergency response for 2+ years. And that's a challenge. It's a challenge for any agency. It's a challenge for government as a whole, and that at the federal level all the way down to local. So, innovation, I guess, and we've talked about innovation in this class, it can only take you so far. You gotta plan it out a little bit better. And, the beauty of this is we'll learn from this experience and move on and be better prepared for the next time something like this happens. And I pretty much 100% sure there will be a next time. So along that, building up the innovation conversation, so thanks for the segue, David. As the role of government contracting has expanded into the delivery of social services, some have criticized government for being too bureaucratic, focusing on managing contracts rather than building partnerships and fostering innovation with the service delivery contractors. Tom, what is your view on how best to balance this relationship? Do government employees have the flexibility and or the luxury of utilizing contractual relationships as an incubator for innovation?
Yeah, I think the contractual relationship gives you some opportunities to do that, depending on how you structure those relationships, both at the contractual level as well as the system level. So if you look at, let's look at a lot of areas of public business now, they're exploring innovative ways to combine what traditionally have been input-based contractual relationships. In other words, you pay for a price per unit multiplied by a number of units, and that's what you get, and it's puts, and with little to sort of casual respect or reflection on the outcomes from those outputs. And I think increasingly there's been a demand for more accountability from really for governmental services, and there's also been a lot of research and innovation done into the human and social services in just to pick that sector and stay on that, where there have been a lot of advocates for innovative ways of funding those services, focusing on not only on inputs but also on outcomes. Social impact bonds is one area that was started in the UK about a decade ago, in the area of community corrections or in the public safety area. It's been explored in the area of housing and homelessness, and in other areas where evidence-based practices have provided some really promising advancements in the delivery of direct care. But because those innovations and interventions are still to be explored at scale, they're really difficult to fund if you're just asking the public sector to foot the bill for that at scales. And so have developed are these models where the public sector partners with the private sector to typically involving foundations and publicly oriented non-governmental organizations to partner on these where the public sector agrees to pay for a certain set of social services, and then investors will invest in these sort of innovative practices with the expectation that if the public sector saves money from the expenditure for those services, homelessness, recidivism, or what have you, then the private investors will see a return on their investment, and the taxpayers are no worse off than they were previously, and they get the benefit of more social output, if you will, or out dollars. So there are a lot of ways to look at public contracting from just the input standpoint, which is the focus of most budget conversations, which is we need X number of dollars for this many staff or hours or whatever. But what do we and how does that translate into outputs and outcomes? And then how do we insert some accountability for that? And social impact bonds is just one way. There are other formulaic approaches to funding contracts that combine both base and outcome based for services. But I think increasingly those of us, who work in this space are looking at ways where we can, benefit from both the traditional models of contracting and, some of the more, innovative ways of incorporating outcomes, into our contract.
Well, as a lawyer in the room, I'm heartened to hear that you can take a fairly archaic process like contracting and use it to inspire some innovation. I think that's phenomenal. So to wrap things up, I want to give both of you an opportunity to share any final thoughts you have on public contracting or just public service in general. I'll leave it to you to offer up some final thoughts for our students in this class. So we'll start with Dave.
Yeah, thanks, Sal. So yeah, I mean, I think just maybe the public contracting first, and then I can whack politically on public service after that. I think on Tom's last answer too. I think the thing for me is both thinking about that what is it that you want to buy, and I know that sounds simple, but it can be very powerful, and wanting to do that. The how contracting for and partnership with community-based organizations, moving social societal goals forward. It's part of the arsenal, and I could think of that we're trying to do in the state. We have our goal within the Oregon Health Authority is to eliminate health inequities in Oregon by 2030, which is a pretty audacious goal to try to push forward. That is contracting differently and trying to assure the government contracting and who is eligible, how you do contracting is more approachable for all members of the public, and making sure that everything is translated before it goes out. I mean, just simple things like that, that are super valuable. And I think the last piece on public sector is I think just also being flexible and at sometimes taking risks when you're doing things. And I think emergency response contracting, which has been something that I've done now a lot, is it when you have the right goal in mind and you're doing the right thing, it's okay to take risks. Now you need to be strong and fight back sometimes, but the other fun thing I did is managed the state's purchase of personal protective equipment. So we had some very interesting contracts that sent cash a whole lot of places around the world. And, the team that worked with me would look at me and say, Dave, we can't do that. And I said, no, we have to do this.
Right.
This is the right thing to do. And you know what? Not every deal works. This is going to the good public.
Sal, thanks for the opportunity to bring us together. This is it's been a fun chat. I think I've talked a lot about contracting. I think I'll talk a little bit about public service. I went to this point, served in the Army, and that's where my public service started. When I resigned my commission, I joined the government, working in the legislature. I've worked for a number of years in the executive branch. Now I'm in the third branch of government. So now I have, I will have ended my career at some point, having served in 3 branches of government for Massachusetts. And it's been really rewarding in many respects, personally and professionally. I think if you a chance to attend the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University, an amazing experience, just being introduced to not only so many different areas of public work, but the people who do that work was just, it's just extraordinary. This is it's hard work if you care about it. And as David said, you do have to be out there, and you do have to put your career on the line if you want to make a difference. And you do, in exercising leadership or what have you, you do put yourself at risk. Change is necessary. I think we have to evolve as a society, and in moving social systems forward, and that comes at cost, because there are a lot of entrenched interests that don't want to see things evolve. They don't want to see either actual or perceived loss, even if it's the sense of loss of what they feel they know or are comfortable or certain about. But there's a role for us to play as leaders in the public sector to help people, with that processing to the changes that we need to adjust and adapt to. And it's not easy, and sometimes it's uncomfortable, but it's, unfortunately, getting back to our previous conversation, we have a lot of partners through these relationships that we have, that we can engage in that. I guess I'll just leave it at that, and just appreciate that there are a lot of like-minded people, all working sort of generally in the same direction, with some of the challenges we face day after day.
Well, I love that both of you talked about risk, because that's been a big conversation piece for the class the past couple of weeks. So I appreciate that, and reinforcing some of the lessons we've been learning about risk taking and the importance of that, particularly when it comes to innovation. I want to thank you both for participating in this fireside chat. I know my students will learn a lot from your experiences and perspectives, and I really do appreciate your time. Thanks.